Welcome to the More Than Fitness podcast.
And hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Minisode number 119. Been on a little short hiatus recently, so I hope you guys have missed me and are ready for some more knowledge. For today's Minisode, we have a special request from one of my best friends, Pritch. Shout out to Pritch. I know you're listening to this, but he had he said he listened to the podcast like a true friend, and I asked him if he had any topics that he thought would be helpful that I haven't covered yet. And one that he brought up that I thought is something that I don't hear talked about often, but I do realize that I help my clients through it, and it's something that I think about on a regular basis as well. And I'm not sure what I'm going to title this one yet, but basically he was asking, okay, so my goal is more towards muscle gain, right? So he's going to be eating a little bit more for growth, but his wife is more tailored towards fat loss and weight loss, right? So how do if your spouse or partner or significant other, right, has different goals than you, or maybe I'm going to tailor this not only to his situation, but also common situations of maybe you want to go on a diet, but your spouse doesn't want to go on a diet, or maybe you have kids, right? And you can't just all of a sudden tell your entire family to, hey, we're eating salads now for dinner, and you're just going to accept it. So I wanted to cover that in this minisode the best that I can, because as I was thinking through it, I was like, it's actually going to be the same for most meals. I don't have to, know my best friend's specific situation on what he eats each day, or know your specific situation on what you eat each day to give you some pretty broad advice, but will still be context specific to your situation. So let's go ahead and get into it. The main thing here, the overarching theme here, is that the quality of your meals should be consistent throughout you, your spouse, your family, etc. Right? It's like the situation you don't want to be in is you're eating McDonald's and your spouse is eating a salad, right? Like that's a very big contrast that can create some controversy, right? The idea here is that the types of foods that you eat are going to stay relatively the same, but the quantity of food that you eat is going to be different. So to explain this a little bit further, first, what I would recommend is what meals and we're going to speak more context specific towards dinner time here, because I feel like that's probably where people tend to gather with their family or their spouse, right? Breakfast and lunch can typically be on their own, but with dinner, that's the one where you kind of want to align to make everything the most simple. So that said, I think the idea here is to write down what you've eaten for dinner for the past 2 weeks. Just take out a piece of paper, or you can even do it mentally, right? And basically, if you can't remember every single meal you've had for dinner for the past 2 weeks, probably mostly for the weekdays as well, because weekends for most people tends to be up in the air and they have a little bit more variety. But during the week, what do you typically eat? And the ones you can't remember, don't really worry about it, because you're probably not going to consistently eat that type of meal regularly anyway. So the ones you do remember, those are going to be the important ones. So write down some common meals that you typically eat. And I say for the last 2 weeks, just because that's going to be fresh as in your memory. And it's also, normal life happened, right? So figure out common meals. And then after that, based on what I'm about to say, you can kind of manipulate those meals in the future, or you have an idea of what you typically eat. And then going forward, after I explain these details to you, you can figure out, oh, okay, I can still have this meal, but I can change this one little detail and it'll be more conducive to my goals, but I won't ruin the meal for everybody, right? So I think what would be most helpful is if I gave you guys specific examples to kind of explain what I'm talking about. So again, the quality of the food should still be about the same, but the quantity of the food should be different. So a very simple example of this would be, let's say, steak, potatoes, vegetables. You have that on your plate, right? You and your spouse, despite what your goals are, you're still going to have a decent amount of steak. I think for both of you, whether your goals are muscle gain or fat loss, you should both be eating a decent amount of meat. The difference here will be in your portions of potatoes and vegetables, right? So if you are bulking, if you are trying to gain muscle, well, then it might be a good idea to double down on the potatoes and have a regular serving of vegetables, but double down on the potatoes, right? Because it's going to be it's going to have more calories, it's going to have more carbs, and you can also put more stuff inside the potato, right? The potato is a vehicle for butter, sour cream, cheese, whatever you really want to put in those potatoes that your partner doesn't necessarily have to do. You fix a bunch of baked potatoes. Well, your partner can put on, who has fat loss goals, they can put on spray butter, right? Like 0-calorie spray butter. And that'll be sufficient. But for you, if you're trying to add in more calories, well, then that's whenever you can add on a little bit more butter, or you can add in more sour cream or cheese, right? You can add in a little bit of fats, get some extra calories, but then still also have the vegetables. For the person who has fat loss goals, well, then you want to double up on the vegetables and have maybe a smaller potato. So there's a bunch of potatoes. You take the smaller one, and then you let your significant other have the bigger potatoes, and you double down on the vegetables. Right. So it's all about kind of manipulating these portions based on the type of food that has the best calorie to bite ratio. So with vegetables, you can take 5 bites of vegetables, but only get about 20 calories or so. But if you take 5 bites of potatoes with butter on them, that could be 200 calories, right? So that's something to think about there. There's not huge differences. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here with how to think about this, is that the devil is in the details. It's in the sides. It's in the dressings. It's in the sauces. It's in the oils. Right? It's in these little things that you can manipulate based off of your goals, right? So steak, potatoes, veggies, that's a simple example. Another one would be, let's say, like tacos and burritos. I'm just thinking of like common household meals that I know my clients eat often, I eat often, and is common for others as well. So tacos and burritos, let's compare. So with tacos and burritos, you don't have to have something completely different for each person. However, let's say you're the person who wants to bulk and your goal is muscle gain. So you want to eat more calories. Well, then it might be a good idea to use beef as your meat as opposed to chicken. Let's say instead of a beef burrito, you have a chicken burrito. If you're trying to gain weight, you would have a beef burrito instead of a chicken burrito, and vice versa if your goal is fat loss. It shouldn't be too difficult. The thing here is I don't want it to be too difficult and too much of a contrast between what you eat and your spouse eats, and so it shouldn't be too difficult to make beef versus chicken, right? Another common topping would be sour cream versus no sour cream. If you're trying to gain weight and muscle, well, then maybe throw on some sour cream, throw on some cheese onto your taco, right? And with your partner who is maybe going after fat loss, well, then they can have no sour cream, and maybe they can have low fat cheese, and they can double down on the vegetables that they put on that taco. So hopefully, as I'm saying this, you guys are understanding that you can keep the meal mostly the same, but it's manipulating those little details that are going to make all the difference. You can have a higher calorie, higher carb tortilla or wrap versus a lower calorie and lower carb tortilla and wrap, right? They do have those out there that still taste fairly good. Another example would be pizza. Right? Most people like making homemade pizzas and things like that. And so if it's a one large pizza or something like that for you and your significant other, well, then on your half, you could have, if you're trying to gain weight and gain muscle and eat more calories, well, then you could have more cheese, right? You could throw in some steak on top if you want. You could throw on more pepperoni, right? You could throw on ham, something like that. And for the person who has fat loss goals, you would maybe have a lower fat cheese. You would add more vegetables to it. You would avoid things like sausage or pepperoni or steak, because these meats are going to add up more quickly per bite than if you have lower fat cheese, vegetables, etc. Right? And of course, with all of this, I think it's important that you have communication. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to tell you exactly how to go about that, because it's going to be unique to each individual situation. But it's important that you're upfront with the other person. Hey, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. I know you're trying to accomplish this, or maybe you just don't care as much, and that's fine too. But it's like, I want to make sure that we can both win, right? Have a compromise. And I think being upfront about that will eliminate most problems down the road. So yeah, with pizza, and then also if you make individual pizzas, that's going to be super easy, right? You have a variety of different ingredients. You can put whatever you want on yours, and then they can put whatever they want on theirs, despite whatever your goals are. And lastly, another example would be things like salad, right? So maybe you both do want a salad, and that's great. Maybe it's a grilled chicken salad. Maybe you made homemade chicken tenders or something with your own breading and things. You can throw that in the salad. Well, if you're trying to gain muscle or be in a calorie surplus, well, then maybe you can be a little bit more generous with the ranch dressing, if that's what you decide to have, or whatever oil you decide to put on it. Maybe you put in a little bit more cheese, maybe some hard-boiled eggs, right? Get in a little bit more fats and proteins in there than normal. And then for the person who is going through fat loss and they're trying to diet more, well, then of course, be a little bit more generous, be a little bit less generous with the dressings. Maybe dip, I've talked about this tip before, dip your fork in the dressing first, and then eat each bite of salad. Instead of dumping the ranch dressing all over it, get a little bit on your fork, take a bite, and each time you do that, you're still going to get dressing with each bite. However, you're not going to have more dressing than necessary and more calories than necessary, but it still tastes delicious, right? So yeah, I think that just about covers it. And of course, like if you can add things on the side of all these meals, like maybe you eat extra bread, maybe you put more butter on your bread. Maybe the person who's going through a diet can have baked chips and you can have regular chips. With French fries, maybe you can make some fries with more oil than others. There's so many different ways that you can go about this, but I think what's important is you look at the common meals that you have and then figure out how you can tweak the details of each individual ingredient to not be a pain in the ass, but also be conducive to your goals, right? I think that is the key here. All right. And that is it for Minisode number 119. Hope that was helpful. I forgot my outro. Thank you guys, as always, for listening and for watching. See ya.